All right, today we're going to be talking about our solving square root equations and inequalities. So let's first start with solving square root equations. So the first thing you want to do is to isolate the square root. So we want to get the square root all by itself on this side, and we want to move everything else to the other side. So what we're going to do first is we're going to move this over by subtracting 2. And then we have the square root of x plus 4 equals 6. Now we're going to square both sides of the equation because these are inverses. So squaring is the opposite of the square root. So what you're going to do is we're going to take this, square it, and what you do to that side, got to keep it balanced to do to that. And then when you do that, your root drops and you're just left with x plus 4. And then 6 squared is 36. Now you're going to go ahead and you're going to solve the rest of the equation. So subtract your 4 minus 4 and you get x equals 32. Now we have to be careful, especially since we're dealing with radicals. You have to check for extraneous solutions. Extraneous solutions are answers that could potentially not actually work in the equation. So you have to always check your answer. So what you do is you're going to sub in your answers that you got into the original equation, and you must get a true statement. If you don't get a true statement, it's not an actual solution. So what we did here was we said x was 32, so we substituted that in, and then now 32 plus 4 is 36, and then square root of 36 is 6, and then don't forget to bring down your 2. So 6 plus 2 is 8. So this is a true statement, so this is the solution. Now, we did not get this, but let's say if we got something as an example of 6 equals 4. Well, that's not true, so this would not be a solution. Another example would be negative 2 and 2. Those are not true, so that would also be, or any other number. So those are all examples. So it has to be a true in order for it to actually be a solution. So always check your answers on these. All right, let's get started with number 1. So first what we did was we added 3 to both sides. Now that we've moved this over here, we've got square root of x plus 8 equals 4. Now we need to square both sides to get rid of the square root or undo the square root. So I'm left with x plus 8 equals 16. Subtract 8 from both sides, and I've got x equals 8. Okay, so now let's check to see. We have to do that. So we're going to substitute in wherever you see x, substituting your answer, and you get 16 here. That simplifies to 4. 4 minus 3 is 1. 1 equals 1. So we know that's true, so therefore this is the correct answer. Okay. For the next step, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to move the 1 to that side by subtracting, and then you're left with the square root of 2x plus 10 equals 6. And then now undo it, the root, by squaring both sides. Well, once you square it, you can drop the root because that's simplified or canceled out. And then you've got that. Subtract 10. Oops. Subtract 10 by moving it over, and then divide by 2, and then you get x equals 13. So to double check to make sure, we have to check it. So we're going to take 13, substitute it in wherever you see x, and so 2 times 13 plus 10, and then copy the rest down. That is 36. Square root of 36 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. So since 7 equals 7, we know that's true, so that is the answer. All right. Now this one is very important. You have to pay attention. If you notice right here, when we square it, we're squaring everything on this side. So what you're actually going to do is you're going to write this twice. So here and here. So when you're doing that, make sure you're distributing. And when you FOIL, although I don't like to use FOIL, it's basically distribute. That's what I say. All right, so you're going to distribute all of your things and you're going to end up getting x squared minus 14x plus 49 from that. So don't just make it x minus 7 because that you need to make sure you do this. So watch out here. All right, now we want to move these over here because we want this to equal 0. So once you got that, you get x squared minus 17x plus 70. Now you're going to factor and set equal to 0. And then once you get that, you add 7. So add 7. So we've got one solution here. So if you're to go x minus 10 equals 0, you need to add 10. And so that's where we get this. But now we need to know, are these really the solution? So you have to check both answers. So wherever we see 7, or wherever we see x, we're going to substitute in 7. So 7 minus 7, well, that gives you 0. And then here, oops, I did it again. Just like Brittany. Okay. So here gives you that, and then bring this down. So 21 minus 21 gives you 0. Square root of 0 is 0. So we have a true statement. So far, 7 works out. Now do both solutions. So you have to do the same thing here. Wherever you see x, substituting your answer, this is going to give you 3. You got 30. And then 30 minus 21 is 9, which simplifies to 3. So that is true. So this works also. So you know both of these are the correct answers. So always check an answer. If you get an answer that doesn't work, it's not a solution. All right, now we're going to talk about solving inequalities. So when we're solving inequalities, we can't take the square root of a negative. So the first part is you are going to set everything underneath the radical, and I kind of color coded it here. So you're going to set, everything under the radical equal to 0. So this is what I did right here, is I took this part right underneath here, and I just made it, but you're going to do it because you can't have a negative under the radical, so it's got to be bigger than 0. And you're going to solve that. So I know this is the first part. Then the second part, or step 2, is now you're just going to solve everything. So now you're going to go ahead, you're going to subtract 5 from both sides. Oops. And then don't forget to divide by a negative. When you divide by a -1, you need to flip the sign. So whenever you multiply or divide, you need to flip the sign. All right, so then you go through, we solve it, and if you noticed right here, since we divided by -1, changed our signs, we flipped it that way. All right, so now we have our first part, we have our second part, which is this. And what you're going to do is you're going to use interval notation. So our first part we says was x is greater than or equal to -2. So since this is a closed point, put a point there. And then it says x is greater than or equal. So we're going to draw that way. Now the second point says x is greater than 6. So since x is, or excuse me, less than 6. So we're going to do an open. So this is open point. Okay. So open, and it's going to go this way. So what you're going to do is you're going to look for where it overlaps. Wherever it overlaps is where you're going to do your interval notation. So if you look here, this part was the -2, and you have a bracket. So notice that bracket right here is because it's a closed point. Okay, now here you have a parenthesis, and that's because this is open right here. All right, so, and then that's your answer. If you're to plug this in on Desmos, you will get something that looks like that. But remember, the overlap is the solution from there. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's do this first part. So first, what you're going to do is we're going to do what's under the radical first, and you set it greater than or equal to 0. Okay, well, that's pretty easy. Well, since we have closed point there, you're going to have your bracket. Now we need to solve the whole thing, so that's the second part. So you're going to go ahead, add 4 to both sides, and then you're going to get 3 root x is less than or equal to 9. Divide both sides by 3. That cancels. Oops, wow. This cancels, and then you're left with square root of x is less than or equal to 3. All right, to get rid of this root, you have to square both sides. And then now you're going to have x is less than or equal to 9. So now, notice how this is right here. That's why we have a bracket there. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to put closed point here, and this is going that direction. And then here, we're going to take this, it's also a closed point, and it's going that direction. So they both overlap from right here. So that's what this is your final answer. All right, let's do a couple more. So let's do the first part. So first we're going to do what's under the radical, and then you're setting it greater than or equal to 0. So go ahead, 3x, 3, divide both sides by 3. X is greater than or equal to 1. So if x is greater than or equal to 1, it's going to be closed, and it's going that way. Now we're going to do the whole thing. So you're going to move the 9 over, and you're going to get 6. So then you take the square root of 3x minus 3 and 6, and now square it. So you get 3x minus 3 is greater than 36. Subtract the 3, so we're moving this over. And then divide by 3. And then now, since this is going to be open, so we're going to come down here, it's going to be open, and it says x is greater than. So if you notice there, now my overlapping part is from here all the way to infinity. So you have a parenthesis, and then infinity is a parenthesis also. So make sure you put that down. That's your answer there. And then last but not least, let's go ahead. Let's do this part. We're doing what's underneath the radical here. And then you're subtracting 6. And then divide by 3. And you'll get x is greater than or equal to -2. So we did our closed. It's going this direction. All right, so now let's come over here and and now we're going to do the whole thing. So now you're going to add 5 to the other side, and then we're going to square everything. So you get 3x plus 6 is less than or equal to 81. So subtract the 6, divide by 3, and then you have x is less than or greater than 25. So now, since this is that means it's going to be closed. Or I'm sorry, did I say less than or greater than? I meant to say less than if I didn't. All right, so closed, and it's going to go this way. So again, obviously my points aren't accurate as far as numbers counting, but it's wherever it overlaps, is the solution. And since this is closed, bracket, and since this is closed, bracket. All right, so you're going to go ahead, you're going to complete the rest, and that is how you solve square root equations and inequalities.